All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeff Richardson, your host here for today. We're just at the top of the hour. I'm going to give a moment for folks to join before we kick off and bring on speakers, go through introductions. At the moment, though, if you already are on, say hello to our very own Leslie Amadio. She's in our chat today. Say hi. Let us know where you're joining from. If you have questions, we'll be taking those as well. Hopefully, we'll get through as many of those as we can. There's a separate Q&A tab for that, but you can also send it to Leslie in the chat. She loves sending them over to me. So, but welcome. And wow, okay, we've jumped up pretty quick here, and we're already a minute after, and we have a lot to do. So we're just going to dive right in. So again, welcome. I'm Jeff Richardson. I'm the product marketing director here at Kochava, and really excited to cover a 101 topic today, all around app attribution. If you're kind of learning about Kochava for the first time, or you haven't had prior experience with Kochava, just a quick note on who is Kochava. We've been an MMP, a mobile measurement partner, since 2011. So still the early days of the mobile app ecosystem and the boom. Now, many years later, we do way more than just mobile. We're big in connected TV measurement, other connected devices, and far beyond just mobile channels. So think mobile, CTV, programmatic display, online video. There's things we do even in advanced channels around linear TV, digital out of home, you name it. So we're going to cover app attribution in a more digital sense today. But if you have questions about how we measure other more offline channels or advanced channels, we'll step into some of that as well. So let me go ahead and start with announcements and some housekeeping, and then we'll meet our speakers and we'll jump in. So first of all, we love engagement. We love interaction. So dive into the chat. You'll find that up in the right-hand upper corner of your screen. You can say hello. Our Leslie Amadio from our marketing team is in the chat as our moderator. If you have questions, we love questions, put those in the Q&A tab. You'll see that up in that same upper right corner box, and submit those. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If we don't get to yours, we'll follow up after the webinar. Second, the webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it on demand later, go through at your own pace, pause the video if you want to, screenshot something. So feel free to just sit back, relax, and enjoy today. Don't feel like you got to take a bunch of notes or take screenshots as we go. In the Docs tab, also up in that right corner, we have a ton of related resources to some of the topics that we'll cover today. So please feel free to explore those. Those will open up in a different tab, and you can take a look after the webinar. Those also will be available when we send you the on-demand link sometime in the next 24 hours. So you'll be able to access those later as well. And then last but not least, obviously this is a 1 hour webinar on a pretty big topic, so we're not going to get through everything. But if you want more related content on all things Kochava, attribution, mobile, CTV, app advertising, follow us online. We're on Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and other handles. So we hope to see you there as well. So let's go ahead at this point and let's meet our speakers for today. So I'm going to bring them up on the stage here and have them introduce themselves. So we have James, we have Caitlin, and we have Jacob. So awesome. They're all coming up. Perfect. Welcome, you three. Let's see. Let's go ahead and just have you introduce yourselves in the order on the slide before us here. So James.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be on with you today. I'm James Benoit, and I run sales engineering for Kochava.
Thanks, James. Caitlin.
Hey, everybody. My name is Caitlin Garno, and I am on the client success team here at Kochava. Excited to be with you today.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob. I lead up our client onboarding team here at Kochava. So we work with a lot of our new prospects and day-to-day with customers who are just getting started. So glad to see quite a few of you out there.
Yeah. You three are the titans of app attribution knowledge and expertise. So I'm excited to dive into this topic with you three. So let's see, I've just launched a poll. We want to just gauge the audience's familiarity with app attribution, their level of understanding. So I've just opened that poll. If you can, go ahead and jump in and rate your understanding of app attribution on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being I'm total novice, new to the topic, 5 being like expert pro. And so good, we have a good mix. It looks like the twos have it at the moment, but change in real time. So this is a good mix. I'm excited to see this because if you all answered 5, then we might feel like, well, what are we doing here today? So I'm excited. I'm going to leave this poll open in the background. So if you haven't voted yet, please go ahead and continue to put in your input there so we have a good gauge of where you all are at. So real quick on the agenda before us across the next 55 minutes here, we're going to talk about kind of the what and why of attribution, very high level. We're going to go under the hood, look at how attribution actually works, some really helpful flow diagrams that will showcase how it works from A to Z. And then we have really an exploration of all the different factors and inputs that impact attribution. And then we'll look at future of attribution, where are things headed? And then we'll cover attribution game plan, best practices for how you can make sure your attribution strategy fits your campaign goals and objectives. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into just what is attribution. And Caitlin, can you just start us off with a high level here?
Yeah, definitely. So when we think of attribution, if we want to keep it as simple as possible, we're really just thinking assigning credit to the click or impression that drove the user to either install your app or to complete one of your KPIs, one of those post-install events. So we're looking at down to that click or impression level. It allows you to connect the dots between your marketing efforts, so those actual campaigns that you're putting your hard-earned money into, to the outcomes, so the installs and the actions that those users are taking after the install. It gives you the ability to see what's working, what's not, and allows you to really optimize and improve your ROAS.
Yep. And Jacob, you can talk about just some of the ways that attribution data is used and put into action.
Yeah, absolutely. So in practice, especially on the digital advertising side, it provides, number one, we got it up there, it's real-time feedback for campaigns that are in flight. So there's a concept behind attribution of what's called a data postback, and that's real-time conversion data coming off of these campaigns. And that's going to be used by a ton of your different digital partners. So Facebook, Google, TikTok, a ton of our large partners, they will use that data and be optimizing your campaigns in real time. It helps with their audience suppression, specific targeting for those campaigns, and really allows you to make that connection real time while the campaigns are in flight. There's also a ton of information that you can glean outside of your campaigns in kind of a post-campaign analysis with after-the-fact data as well. So really gives you a ton of opportunity to re-engage those users once you have an understanding really of where they came from.
Yeah. And then one of the things I've seen a lot is we have clients sometimes that reach out, or even people interested in attribution with an MMP or some measurement provider, and they're trying to make the business case internally for, well, why in the world do we need attribution? And so we put together some just very broad, these are not prescriptive across the board for every organization, but what are the impacts of having attribution? So James, maybe you can speak through some of these in terms of why, if you will.
Yeah, happy to. So these can really be understood as the byproducts of effectively using a measurement system to understand your media dollars, whether we're talking about paid or owned. So for example, when we talk about direct cost savings, when you're measuring all of your media channels in one centralized system of record, you have the ability to understand the influence and overlap between sources and understand perhaps certain sources aren't as effective at driving toward the particular outcome that is of importance to you, therefore allowing you to better allocate your budget, which is the second square you see on the slide there. And all of that feeds into campaign optimization, because we're not really just talking about budget allocation at the partner level. We're talking about allowing you to understand performance at whatever level of granularity is relevant to you. Campaign level is probably the most common, but we can get down to the creative level should you have the desire to understand down to what is the creative variant that's working best and giving you the data and the connections with your media partners to provide the signal that would allow the platforms where you're activating media to effectively optimize. That obviously has an impact over overall efficiency, but it also in the sense of reducing overlap. There's a lot of cases where you might find that similar, different partners that you're running media with are actually addressing media to the same user base. Having a system of record that allows you to understand who those users are and the rate at which they're receiving impressions, the rate at which they're clicking through ads, will allow you to more efficiently allocate budget so that you aren't hitting the same users with the same media dollars across multiple partners at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And then again, there's different, if you will, configurable tools, bells, levers, if you will, that you can pull to increase impact even beyond the numbers and metrics shared here. Even just having attribution out of the box and not diving into some of the nitty gritty options, you'll gain some of these efficiency savings as well. So the final thing before we kind of jump under the hood and look at some of the ways the attribution works and the signals involved, one question we get a lot too is, well, what exactly can I measure? So we have this motto at Kochava, I think, is like measure everything. Anything you're running, there's usually a way to measure it. Maybe with a few corner cases that might be really hard. But James, maybe you can speak through this real fast, obviously without covering every little dot and tittle. But what is it that we can measure?
Yeah, this is a really solid depiction of the spectrum of things that you can measure with a platform like Kochava. So a lot of the times you might think of a measurement platform like us to be mobile specific. That is a very sort of deep rooted part of our heritage. But in this day and age, we have SDKs and sort of server to server APIs to measure essentially any connected device. You can see the list there on the left. In addition to, if you look at the middle and kind of right-hand column, paid and owned media are sort of the two primary categories that media generally falls into. Paid media, obviously, we maintain integrations with thousands of different endpoints. So think ad networks, DSPs, the large social platforms. But then we also have tooling to allow you to measure owned media in effectively the same way. And back to what I mentioned earlier about a sort of system of record, giving you the ability to measure everything, i.e. paid media and owned media, as you think about influence and overlap and the way those different media sources are driving to your particular outcomes, gives you a really strong ability to see the full picture of everything that's happening that has to do with driving traffic to your website or traffic into your mobile or your CTV apps. And then, when you think about more advanced channels, these generally aren't on the radar. And it's something we like to highlight is around advanced channels and premium partnerships. So, we have certain capabilities to measure, for example, digital out of home and out of home media. So, partnerships with companies like Clear Channel, for example, where we can, produce reporting that lets you understand, hey, did this billboard or this ad buy that I purchased in this particular DMA or in this particular zip code incrementally drive more visits to my website or app installs or towards some KPI or in-app event inside of your app. So when we say measure everything, we really mean everything.
Yeah, and Ben asked a great question. How is web measured? So we talk about SDKs, often software development kits, and we often talk about mobile apps, CTV apps, gaming console. But for web, there's the notion of what we've called a web SDK. I guess it's not really an SDK. It's more of a JavaScript snippet, if you will, or a pixel that you can drop onto a website and have it send page visits, specific activities or conversions or form fills or lead capture. So that's how web measurement can be accomplished separate from mobile apps and CTV apps. So thanks for that question, Ben. And thanks for covering off on that, James. So if we look to the next section, we're going to talk about how attribution works, and we're going to go fast here. So again, if you have more questions, put them in the chat and you will be able to watch this again on demand, remember, so you can pause and even slow it down to a slower speed if we need to. But so let's dive in first and talk about the signals behind attribution. So Caitlin, can you unpack these two sides for us?
Yeah. When we think of attribution taking place, it's almost an equation where you need two different sides here. So we need the ad signal side and we need the app signal side for attribution to take place. On the ad signal side, this is your paid and owned media. I highly recommend tracking all of your owned media, all of your paid media. When we can get the signal from all of those different placements, your attribution is just going to be so much more valuable, and you can really see what's driving those users. This is clicks and impressions, and it's across all campaign types. So it can be search, display, video, audio, links that you're emailing out to customers, SMS messages, anywhere that a user is interacting with the ad. If we can get that ad signal in, we're going to just get you much better output. QR code scans are another one. You can kind of think of them as a click, the user interacting with it like a click. Yep. The other side of that is the app signal. And this is where Kochava needs to receive the install, so the first launch of that app, and any post-install events that are valuable to you. This is going to really depend on the type of app that you have, which events are valuable and most useful for you. But generally I see the most success when clients are having a wide range of events, from the really high power purchases or subscriptions, as well as some sort of representation of continual use of the app, such as a video start, if you are a video platform, or entering a new level of a game, that type of thing, because then you can really see users who are returning and completing continuous usage of your app. On the website, I know we talked about web briefly there. We think of it quite similarly to an app in that the first visit could be the install event. And then any sort of subsequent action could really be viewed as that post-install event. Being really intentional with these events to get your app signal high value for you is super important.
Yeah, and I think I know we've had instances sometimes working with customers where they have given maybe the SDK integration documentation to their app developers and maybe haven't been prescriptive on what events specifically they want to measure and what event metadata, which is like you can send a purchase, but also send the price, the SKU, or the ID of the product, because all that context is valuable behind the event. If you have 1,000 purchases, but you don't know what the revenue was or the specific products, that's a miss. So you can not just send the events, but detailed metadata with each event. And I know we've talked about too a lot this idea of think about the full engagement funnel. So first app open, we obviously measure install. If all you have is install and purchase, then you don't know how somebody got from install all the way deep down in the funnel. And you're not going to have enough post-install event data hydration to do things like optimization for campaigns based on specific events. So full funnel event data. So app open, registration, add to cart, product view, things like that. Very, very important for being able to optimize. You had mentioned owned media as part of that ad signal side, and I went and opened a poll, and I'm just going to jump to the results real fast because it's a question we always ask, and oftentimes it's not on folks' radar. So it's great to see that right now, at least about 71% of the audience are measuring their own media, and the rest are kind of in a bucket of no, not yet, but now I know I should be. So yes, if you're not measuring your own media, then you're likely giving paid media channels credit for things that your own smart banners on your website, for example, might be driving, or your own email or SMS text campaign efforts. So I'm going to leave that poll open in the background for a little longer because the results are still changing. And if you haven't voted, please do. So the next thing is, we just talked about the signals, but how in the world does Kochava or your measurement provider get the signals to actually do the attribution? So Jacob, can you kind of just unpack these two sides here and how we get that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the great part of working with a MMP like Kochava is that as long as we can receive a signal for it and it's measured, we're going to be able to attribute and provide outcomes on that. And so one of the great things that my team gets to be involved with very often is on the ground floor with companies that are getting started who want to figure out how to pass this data in. Because as long as it's in there, we're going to be able to provide that reporting and you can get that return. The way that data is passed in, so we basically work with two separate entities, again, very similar to the attribution match, is we need to have an ad signal and then also an app signal to pair with that. The way we get the ad signal is any way that we can receive some sort of notification that the ad was either interacted with or viewed. And so that can come through our certified integrations. We have integrations with over 6,000 different partners. We'll probably name a few in the coming slides. Yeah. We work with them very, very consistently to maintain all of the data points and macros that they're able to capture in their campaigns, because each partner is very unique in their integration and the data they're able to pass. So we work at an independent level with each of those to make sure that those are always up to date and we're able to receive the highest quality signal possible from each of them. The next signal that we would typically receive is the SAN attribution signal. So while Kochava is maintaining a holistic view of all your campaigns, you have very large scale optimized campaigns on specific partner platforms, typically your Metas, your Googles, where they're doing a ton of real-time optimization and a lot of the management of the campaign is in that platform. And so we're working continuously with those partners to refresh their APIs, make sure they have the most up-to-date attribution specs and technology available to them, so that way they can continue that. And then the third one, and we've talked about it quite a bit too, is tracking your own media. And so own media is a little bit trickier because it's everywhere and it's kind of any of the promotions that you're running just through your day-to-day marketing efforts. It's not a planned campaign. It's just general awareness and promotion of your brand. And so what we created for that is a tool called Smart Links, which are platform agnostic links. So they can be used iOS, Android, web, really anywhere that you're promoting the apps. And you can place those just as you would any sort of landing page URL or redirect URL. And so those are often used to provide a signal for those types of campaigns and really get aware of your brand efforts.
Yeah, and Jacob, I think Smart Links, right, in terms of channel use cases would be, we see them a lot on email campaigns, can be used on SMS.
Email campaigns.
Yeah.
Social posts, email campaigns, anywhere on your website, really anywhere that you don't know exactly what type of device the user is going to be interacting with, because the link is able to adapt and send the user to a different destination based on that response. So if they're on iOS, we need them to go to the App Store. If they're on a desktop computer and they need to go to a website, we can send them there all through a single source.
And in the Docs tab, there's a case studies link to our case studies page, but one of the case studies in there for deep linking as a kind of category is around QR codes. So that's something that Caitlin had mentioned in the last slide as a type of ad signal that comes through our Smart Links offering that has a built-in QR code generator. So think like if you're fast casual dining or QSR or many other verticals, and you have QR codes on in-store signage or other digital or printed applications, that can all be measured, and that would be kind of maybe owned media in some cases, not necessarily all cases, but just one more use case to make sure you can, as we think about measuring everything, that's what we're talking about. So go ahead, Jacob, I'll let you complete there now.
Yeah, no problem. So we just kind of covered a ton of information that we get into the views from all your marketing efforts. So now let's tie it into those outcomes. And that really comes down from the app signal. So we've got pictures of a connected TV device, a mobile phone, a tablet, and a desktop computer. So really any of those sources where we're seeing users interact with your brand, with your company on your own and operated platforms, that's going to be where we're receiving the app signal. So to provide that on the mobile side and the CTV side, and even web too, we provide an SDK, which is software development kit, that takes care of all of the tracking pretty much out of the box. Once you start the SDK, it's able to pass all the information that we need to make those matches back to those marketing campaigns. The only big additional call out that I'll make there, and Jeff alluded to this earlier as well, is making sure that you're tracking the KPIs beyond just app open and app install that provide valuable outcomes for your business. So if you're an e-commerce company, knowing which users are adding to their cart, or making sure that metadata about what items are being purchased or being passed on a checkout event, those are all very important things, and we try to work with customers to make sure that's captured out of the gates. The next option that we have there is the SDK-less server-to-server signal. So Kochava has an ingestion API for App Signal, and we can receive any data that you might be capturing server-side or through a CDP. I know we didn't put them on the checklist there, but we do have integrations with most major CDPs as well to pass data in, which at that point, it really helps make the integration with Kochava fairly easy. You can just flip a switch and we'll start receiving the data without much or very minimal engineering work.
Yeah, and a great question came from Julie. Can you discuss what signals you need to receive from in-app signals, i.e., mobile ID, and if that's not available, what else can be used? We'll get into some of the match types, if you will, and certain device characteristics or identifiers that are available. All of that is configurable by the advertiser or the app developer or brand. So you put in the SDK, the Kochava SDK, or you set up your server-to-server integrations, and you're the data controller, if you will, that decides what gets sent to Kochava. And yes, there are certain identifiers if the user hasn't toggled off a certain privacy setting, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that are available that can be used for things like deterministic attribution between the ad signal side and the app signal side. So great question, Julie. And I'll mention there's a bunch of other questions in here that we've been receiving. So thank you for those. We are going to cover some of the questions that have been asked in upcoming slides. So I'll probably bring those up at those times just to correlate those. But let's go ahead and jump now to just a kind of the final stage, which is attribution, before we dive deep into some flows and examples. So James, can you just unpack from a high level the signals coming together and this notion of, view through, click through, et cetera?
Yeah, for sure. And we've gone deep on the ad signal and app signal side. That's hopefully clear to everyone. But then considering what happens once Kochava has received these signal sets, view through, click through. So view through being attributions of engagement, app install event activity back to an ad impression as per the signal we would have ingested from your media channel. Click through, obviously someone seeing an ad and then clicking through, perhaps being redirected to the App Store by Kochava to download the app and begin engaging from there. Cross-screen, cross-device, that's getting into some nuances around where you're running your media. So a lot of times we have lots of kind of enterprise use cases where media is being run on a CTV device, but the conversion is actually happening on a mobile device. And we will probably get into kind of more of the details around how that works. Typically, that's view through in the context of CTV. A lot of media isn't actually clickable, but that's a capability we have to give you that sort of cross-device picture of where engagement's coming from, whether it's CTV to a mobile device, a mobile app, CTV to a web visit that happens on a mobile device or a laptop, for example. The next bullet, last touch and multi-touch. Last touch is sort of, if you were to just kind of zoom out to the 100,000 foot view, generally speaking, what, the real-time methodology that we employ can be understood as a last touch model, although there are nuances of that we'll get into a little bit later in the presentation, as well as multi-touch, where because we're ingesting all of this signal, we let you understand what was that path to conversion. A lot of time, multi-touch can be defined in a lot of different ways, but the way that we largely look at it is, if I'm a marketer and I want to understand my user's path to conversion, that would involve understanding what were all the media touch points that they had that led up to them ultimately taking the performing the event of interest, whether that's an install, a web visit, what have you. And so we have sort of specialized reporting that allows you to understand things from a multi-touch perspective. Configurable attribution, we'll get into that in later slides, but there's a lot of kind of configurations you have access to sort of govern when and how different media channels are awarded credit for conversion activity. And then, of course, Scan and Ad Attribution Kit for iOS has introduced an additional dimension into all of this that we'll talk about more later. But that would be a kind of methodology that's employed, when an app is either not showing the app tracking transparency prompt, which is the prompt if you use iOS, you probably have seen it. It's, do you want to allow this app to track? And that sort of governs or gates access to the IDFA, the advertising ID for iOS devices. And so depending on sort of the nature of your iOS app and how that has been implemented, if at all, there could also be this additional dimension, like I said, of scan reporting, which would be kind of campaign, counts of conversions by campaign, sort of higher level aggregate reporting that can be an end result as well.
Yeah, and if you have more, we have historical webinars we've done on Scan. We have a whole guide on Scan. It's not something we'll probably just, that's the scratch of the surface on that one that we'll be able to probably tackle today. But if you have questions about that and you have an iOS app and you're looking to run on Scan, which SKAD network, or the future state, which is now Ad Attribution Kit, which is why that AAK there, lots of acronyms, feel free to reach out to us. And I'll mention there's a Git attribution demo up at the top of the screen. So if at any point we don't get to your questions, or you have something we've kind of glossed over and you're like, I want to deep dive on that, click that button and we can follow up and get in touch with you. So now there's an important thing. This was kind of a SAN APIs was mentioned in part of the ad signal side of the equation. And SAN stands for Self-Attributing Network, also sometimes referred to by other providers as Self-Reporting Network. So SAN or SRN are the two acronyms that are often floated around. So Caitlin, can you unpack for us real quick the difference between those two? Because there is an interesting nuance in how they operate. And I can also get to the flow diagrams we have to showcase the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that in the next couple slides, we have some really great visuals of how the actual data flows here. But to break it down for you, traditional networks and self-attributing networks, the way that Kochava and MMPs ingest that ad signal side of things functions and flows differently. So with a traditional network within the Kochava platform, you will go in and configure your actual click and impression URLs that are placed behind the creative, and ensures that we are able to ingest that ad signal and have it available for attribution. That means that users are interacting with your campaigns, clicking or impressions are served, and Kochava in real time is aware of that ad interaction. The difference is with self-attributing networks, or SANs, is that you will do some setup within the Kochava platform to connect the communication pipes between us and the network, but you won't create the actual URL that's placed behind the creative. In self-attributing networks, they will collect all of those clicks and impressions and share back to Kochava the single click or impression that they believe drove the user to complete that action. So in the traditional network sense, Kochava has full visibility into all of the ad signal and user flow there, whereas self-attributing networks, we have visibility into a single click or impression. So this visual here is for the traditional network flow. On the left-hand side, where number 1 is, that's the visual for us receiving those real-time clicks and impressions. At the same time, the app is sending Kochava all of the app signal. With the self-attributing network, the big difference here is that orange or the salmon color here, where we mentioned the SAN API. While we receive the install or post-install events from your app, we will actually make a call to the SANs API, so Meta Ads, Google, TikTok, say, hey, an install occurred. This is the information about the install. Do you have any eligible clicks or impressions? That network will run through their records of all clicks and impressions for that device and respond back to us, either saying, nope, no claim, or yes, we're making a claim. Here is the information about the click or impression that we have on record. Each network, I know Jacob mentioned earlier how each network has kind of different information that will collect on their clicks and impressions. Same with the SANs, it's kind of a different set of data that each one shares back to us, but it generally includes information about the creative, the campaign, sometimes placement information. We receive that, and we will run all of that information through our attribution waterfall. But really the big difference here is just the way that Kochava is able to ingest the ad signal from the networks.
Yeah, and I'll add on there, I think too, like, you might refer or hear the name walled garden as another term, or walled garden super publishers. Yes. is a terminology that's been used before. And that's kind of that moat, if you will, that protection of their signal, where, again, the traditional networks, some examples on the left, versus the big super publishers that most advertisers are at least running with several or more of these. Oftentimes they're having the lion's share of an advertiser's spend to promote their app or promote engagement from existing app users. And so there's that distinction that Caitlin did a great job talking through that. I meant to go to the flow diagrams a little earlier because you're doing such a great job. I was like, oh, should I go to the next slide yet or not? But yeah, I think that notion of, you see, there's really 4 steps for traditional networks, whereas with the self-attributing, self-reporting, there's 6 steps, because there's that interplay that happens after we've gotten the app signal to then say, hey, do you have anything that matches this user or device that we should attribute to? And all of this happens in literal milliseconds in the back end. So when Kochava gets that app install, we're basically doing both these flows in a matter of milliseconds to check everything we have impression and click wise from those traditional networks, and then rapid fire exchanges of API calls with the self-attributing, self-reporting networks to say, okay, we're about to perform attribution. Do you have anything we should know about for these? So that's why with traditional networks, you might see hundreds, thousands, in some cases, millions of impressions within Kochava for those partners that you're running campaigns with, thousands, maybe millions of clicks. Whereas with the self-attributing, you're only going to see the click or impression if they send it with a claim for a conversion. And so that's, we'll get into a little bit about reporting discrepancies later, because that's an important nuance to know about. It's like, well, I have all these clicks in Facebook, but why don't I see those in Kochava at that same level? And that's part of the reason why.
And
So-
Jeff, can I just add in one more thing there? I think it's
Yes.
also really important to remember when we're talking about tracking owned media, the flow there is the same as we're seeing for traditional networks. So if you're deploying smart links, if you're deploying QR codes, any sort of Kochava tracker for your owned media, this is the part of the equation that falls into for attribution.
Yeah, that's good to know. And actually, I'll share one more time, as we mentioned owned media again. This was the poll from earlier and where it landed. So we ended up with about 50% of folks measuring owned media, 40% no, and about 7% are going to start here hopefully soon. So if you're not doing it now and your current setup doesn't really allow you to measure owned media, then get in touch with us and we can help you align and bring those two worlds together, because that's really important and vital. So let's go ahead and jump into now an actual flow diagram. Jacob, you're going to help walk us through this. This is hey, suppose you see an impression on your smartphone and what happens from that first moment you see the ad all the way through to attribution of some conversion down funnel. So Jacob, I'll progress through these and then let you voice over on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the user, I mean, they're going to start here with the ad appears on their screen. So that's when we receive that first bit of ad signal called the impression. Now, this next part here, it doesn't always happen. And this is where the impression is very important, is that even though the user may or may not click on the ad, we will still have that signal to match off of by the fact that the ad was viewed. But in this example, the user is going to click on the ad. And in this case, they'll go straight to the App Store, select the install button. Now, there's a gap here in traditional tracking. So if you think about web-based tracking where it's utilizing UTMs or query parameters on the inbound URL, once the user hits the App Store, all of that information then goes away. And so we have to wait for them to download the app and install before we're getting that app signal. Because the conversion is not happening immediately. There's this gap that happens when they're at the App Store. And so once they complete that first launch, our SDK or your server-to-server integration will kick in and we'll receive that app signal and can resume tracking. And so what we're doing, and James has hinted at it a few times too, is we're acting as a system of record for those impressions and clicks. And basically, they're just waiting there to receive a signal back from the device that the installs occurred. Once that happens, we're able to make that attribution back to the click, because that was the last moment that we saw that user interact with an ad before they launched the mobile app. And then from there, we run attribution for click, and all of that data syndication occurs. So postbacks are sent to all of your partners, information sent into any sort of data warehouses or other analytics platforms that you have integrated with our system as well. And again, that moment there, kind of the area down there in gray, is happening in milliseconds. So very real time.
And if we didn't have, like you said, if the click did not occur, so user saw ad but did not engage, then essentially that one spot there would just disappear, and we could do view through attribution of connecting conversion to only an impression as opposed to a click interaction.
Exactly.
It's funny, we had a question earlier, and I'm going to put it up while I have this slide up for you to walk through, Jacob. We don't have this one built out flow by flow, but maybe you can voice over this, and I'll bring up a question from, I think it was Jesus. Yes, let me share this. Jesus asked, is CTV to mobile attribution possible? If so, how is the CTV ad impression linked to mobile app store install? So maybe you can answer that as you walk through this, Jacob.
Yeah, absolutely. So the CTV attribution is very interesting because it doesn't follow the same device path. So we're going to talk about match types here very soon, but a lot of the traditional match types that you would use on mobile are device-specific identifiers, IP address, device IDs. So if they have advertising IDs, we can get those. But in this instance, the ad signal and the app signal actually have different platforms where they're taking place. So except for the first one, same screen conversion, very, very similar matches are made there, where the ad is shown on the CTV device and then the conversion takes place there. So you turn on your Roku TV, there's an ad for your streaming service right there. They click on it, they install the app, they open. Very similar to the mobile flow as well. Then you get the concept of cross-screen conversions. This is where the ad is taking place on the CTV device, but then the actual conversion, maybe it's a sign up or a purchase, is happening on a mobile device. And we'll use different identifiers to do this. Predominantly, it's a household IP address to make that match. But Kochava also partners with several of these major CTV platforms to empower a lot of technology for their self-attributing network services that allow them to make matches based off of household graphs. So knowing which devices are a part of a household and then tying it back to that conversion as well. And then same thing with the web SDK as well. We're generally using that household graph or the IP match to make those.
Yeah, really, really helpful. And again, I think, I'll note here too, if we've covered largely digital today, but there's, think about if you run a CTV campaign and you want to look at things like footfall visitation or store visitation or offline conversions. We have tooling and partnerships that facilitate even measurement of offline conversions separate from things happening on connected devices. So if you're in a scenario like, wow, this is great, but the thing I want to measure, the outcome I'm interested in is not any one of these, get in touch with us. And there's, like I said, we believe in measuring everything, and there's usually a way to accomplish that with the right signals involved. So let's get in next to, and Jesus, thank you for the question. We're going to talk about factors that impact attribution. These are things we've already referenced to some degree as we've been covering these prior slides. But James, I want to kick it off to you, because one thing that major impact is privacy and consent, right? And respecting the preferences of the user, whether it's their mobile device, the connected TV in the home, living room, or in the bedroom. So can you walk us through some of the privacy and consent implications and how that impacts attribution?
Yeah, for sure. So I would break this slide down as you look at this into sort of two primary categories of sort of, privacy and consent. There's the platform controls, so things like the app tracking transparency framework on iOS, and then there's the legislative based regulations that we encounter in the marketplace. So things like GDPR in Europe, which you're probably all familiar with or at least have heard of, and then things like CCPA in California. The platform-based rules and the ATT framework from Apple probably being the most prominent. Like I mentioned before, this is the prompt that gates access to the advertising ID on iOS devices. And the question earlier about what does the SDK gather, this is important to understand, because if your iOS app is not showing the prompt, or they show the prompt, it shows the prompt and the user declines to be tracked, the IDFA is available as a string of zeros, so effectively useless for attribution. Our SDK will still pick up device details, things that are picked up from the network connection, so things like user agent, IP address, other sort of device characteristics, which can still be used in some cases for attribution. We actually have a feature set within our tool called Privacy Profiles that allows you to implement very granular rules that govern exactly when certain types of attribution can be engaged. And a lot of this gets down to how do you as a company interpret and regard the platform rules, the rules from Apple, the rules from Google in terms of what is permissible. But we give you all those sort of knobs and dials to ensure that our system is adhering to your kind of interpretation and approach to those rules, but allowing you also to have kind of maximum visibility into, the attribution story, depending on how a user's consent to being tracked or not comes into play. When you think about government-based regulations or legislated regulations like GDPR, we have a consent module within our SDK that allows you to control, the behavior of the SDK depending on where the person is geographically. So for example, we have customers that operate in Europe. They take a very conservative approach, and they're using our consent tools to understand that the person is in a country governed by, in the Eurozone, a country governed by GDPR. And if that's the case, they choose to sleep the SDK, in which case Kochava has no visibility into that user. Nothing is broadcast off of the device. In other cases, they still allow sort of, an installer events to be gathered. But we gather like a privacy string, for example, that reflects the end user's preferences with respect to opting into being tracked and that sort of thing. And then we have server-side integrations, as we've talked about, with all of essentially the entire digital advertising ecosystem to broadcast that consent state of the end user on their device so that your media partners can act accordingly. And so this comes into a play, in almost all cases. App tracking transparency is probably the most prominent, just because it affects all of iOS ever since Apple released iOS 14.5. But then the government-based regulations will probably come into play for you, as most apps are operating in at least one or more jurisdictions where these sort of rules apply. But just know that these are things we've built a lot of tech around to give you maximum control, to ensure that the behavior of the Kochava system is adhering to your stance on these elements.
Yeah, I can tell you're in sales engineering, James, because I know you've had to answer these questions a lot. These are important questions that come up. So real quick, I think the biggest impact, right, from that is this notion of match types and what types of signal. So this largely affects the app signal, like what can be sent. And again, the advertiser or that brand is the data controller in those scenarios, where they're going to decide what do they actually send and make available to Kochava, and then how are those data points facilitated and leveraged for purposes of attribution based on contexts around consent and privacy. So can you quickly just from a high level cover match types, and then we'll jump into the attribution waterfall as we get closer to the end here.
Yeah, and this is a slide we could talk about for a while, just because it's interesting. There's a lot of detail here, but I think the high level thing to understand about our attribution waterfall is what we prioritize and why. So we will always prioritize deterministic matches over modeled matches, and we will always prioritize clicks over impressions. The reason we prioritize clicks over impressions is that a user clicking or tapping on an ad is a strong signal of intent, whereas an impression, the ad was shown on the screen, the user didn't necessarily interact other than perhaps seeing the ad. So that's how we sort of organize our waterfall. And the match types that you see here depict, I guess, the main levels of the waterfall. So you can see deterministic, that gets at device ID to a device ID match. So an in-app ad that results in an app install. We have an IDFA or a Google Ad ID on both sides of the signal set. We're able to make a deterministic match. It then cascades into custom. Custom probably, I'd say, more comes into play when we're talking about cross promotion and owned media. So think large gaming publisher, perhaps dozens of games, are cross promoting game A and game B, that sort of thing. In those cases, we support custom IDs, which would be usable in those particular cases, because if it's a custom ID, the game developer has established something that can be used, that they're passing on the ad signal side and the conversion side. But our system is built to have that sort of flexibility. From there, it cascades down into modeled, and there's several levels of modeled. Not all of these are engaged by default, but they are through configuration of our system. You can allow for, fall back to things like IP only matching or partial IP. Partial IP is not commonly used, but it is a capability, and there are some very niche cases where that could be useful. But Jesus, getting to your question, how do we do CTV to mobile or cross-device attribution? IP to IP is very common. Just because when we're talking about IP to IP matching with a stationary device like a CTV device, it's actually far more reliable than is generally understood, because generally people's understanding of this is rooted in mobile, where devices are moving around. You're jumping from a cell tower to a home Wi-Fi to a Starbucks, what have you. The IP is constantly changing. But that is an important element that comes into play for cross-device. Lastly, household. That's also playing really strongly into the cross-device story, specifically CTV to mobile or CTV to web, where certain CTV partners, and think CTV OEMs, platforms like Samsung, LG, the folks that are actually making these devices, in a lot of cases are actually employing a household graph. And the reason that that's important, and that is actually novel to Kochava, is that in a classic scenario where you have an ad on the CTV leading to a mobile conversion, most providers will only be able to make that association if there's a common IP between the ad signal and the conversion signal. But there may be a case where I see an ad on my CTV in the evening, I'm on the train to work the next day, I'm on a different IP address, I'm on a different device. IP to IP matching breaks down in those cases, and the utilization of a household graph in that real-time lookup that we're performing allows us to give an association between that conversion and the CTV ad when there's no bridging identifier between the ad signal side and the conversion signal side.
Yeah, that was a great breakdown. And again, you talked through a lot of use cases there. If there's a use case that someone in the audience has that doesn't match what we've just covered, again, click that button and you can kind of describe to us your measurement challenge, and we'll help you figure out how to solve that. And, Jesus mentioned CTV to mobile. There's also just, in many cases, we work with a lot of streaming apps that have CTV to CTV. So same screen, connected TV to connected TV, where it's the same device. And that's where ad signal, there's device IDs, just like there are for mobile for Roku, so the Rita, Vizio, the Vita. So there's a lot of different acronyms that stand for the various identifying elements that can be used in attribution. So with this, and you jumped into some of the notes, James, about, click versus impression. Caitlin, can you do us a solid on, looking at the attribution waterfall and quickly speaking through the various layers here? This is quite a bit on screen, but I trust you to kind of unpack it for us.
Absolutely. So attribution waterfall is really how we can visualize a user's journey. The user often has more than one ad signal interaction before they've gone on to install the app or to complete one of those post-install events. Kochava will have all of your traditional network and owned media clicks and impressions. We'll send out those claim requests to all of the self-attributing networks you have configured. We could have dozens of ad signals available for that device. And this illustrates how we prioritize and select the winner of attribution. So at the very beginning, I said attribution is really assigning credit. This is how we decide who gets that credit. What we're looking at here, if we're starting from the far right, we'll pretend we installed the app today, and we're going to look back in time. This view is using a lot of kind of default settings. One of our strong points here at Kochava is we have dozens and dozens and dozens of ways that you can customize this attribution waterfall. But if we're thinking about this in the default way, we are going to look back in time up to 30 days, and we're going to start from the top at our highest level match and work our way down looking for eligible ad signal. James covered deterministic matching, which is those device ID matches. Then we have modeled, so there's a number of options there, but if we think of that as like an IP and user agent match, moving down from the higher level clicks to the impressions. In this example here, we have the orange click on network 1. This would be the winner of attribution here because it's a highest level match. It is a deterministic click, and it is eligible within the look back windows. So these blue bars show some look back windows, meaning if the click were to fall outside of that window, it would no longer be eligible. So the click on network 3, for example, on the modeled click is no longer eligible for attribution. We maintain the record. It's available there for you to look and see the user's journey, but we would not award it attribution. So starting from the top, that orange click is the winner here. All of the other ones are those influencers.
Yeah. And then we have this other example that interesting from, we talked a lot about owned media, but suppose you have, maybe you can unpack why an owned media click is often modeled, and then this little use case here where it would win out.
Yes. So most often owned media falls into a modeled click. Actually, there can also be modeled impressions there, but that's because the places that media served often doesn't have access to a device ID. So you think about sending this over an email, where they're not in an app environment, so the device ID is not available, but other device attributes are available, IP address, user agent, that kind of thing. And in this case, if you use default settings, being a modeled click, it's going to come second to any deterministic click that we have available. And in this visual here, we have a click on network 1, but then we have a click on your owned media, which is falling under the modeled click. If you would like to give the ability for the modeled click to win, because it was the more recent click, we have a setting called the attribution equalizer, which essentially says, put the deterministic and the modeled clicks within the same level and really prioritize the last touch where the user was right before they were driven in to install that app. This is an option. It can be turned on, it can be turned off. It really depends on the type of weight that you're wanting to give to your owned media. But this just illustrates the ability to fine tune the attribution model to fit your team's needs.
Yeah, and that's a great use case. And again, it's often used, we see on owned media, especially where you have a trusted channel or medium through which you're advertising, and you kind of know that exact placement. I don't want to mispronounce the name here, so I'll just pose the question. So where does view through attribution fit into the waterfall? So as you can see here from this slide, thank you for the question. The view through attribution would sit at that below click level. The only counter I guess I'd give to that is there is kind of the sophistication, like just a simple view or an impression. Media mix has gotten way more sophisticated. And so there is the context of an engaged view or a completed impression view as opposed to just a view. So that's where you might have distinct weights within even the impression waterfall. So if on certain platforms, they have the notion of an engaged view, and that could be a video ad where if the user only watches maybe the first 5 seconds, it's just a regular impression, no extra weight. But if it's an engaged view where they get beyond, say, 6 seconds or 10 seconds, that can be measured. And then the priority of that impression can be risen above other impressions because we know, hey, this user didn't just watch 5 seconds of the video, they saw the full thing. So that's a nuance that exists with specific partners and types of integrations. So we are getting close here. I want to have us jump into the next portion here and just talk quickly through configurable attribution, which is something that you mentioned, Caitlin. So can you quickly just, we don't have to go through every single one of these, but can you rip through this for us real quick? And then if somebody wants to know more than what we share, again, get in touch with us.
Absolutely. So these are just a few examples of the ways that you can configure attribution to fit your needs. The definition of configurable attribution is really just how do you want Kochava to implement rules to assign attribution? We have our default settings, but those aren't everyone's preference. So some ways that you can adjust these are the look back settings. We looked at look back windows in the previous, those blue bars telling us how long a click or impression is eligible for attribution. Those can be tightened down pretty significantly. So while a deterministic click might default to 30 days, if you want to cut it down to a single hour, you have the ability to do so at a pretty granular level. You can make these changes at a network level, at individual tracker levels. For specific campaigns, you could have different look back windows available. The match types, again, that equalizer where we can look at seeing an equalization between your owned media and paid media to kind of give you the ability to see more owned media attribution taking place. All of these are available within different parts of our platform. And part of that Get Attribution demo button at the top, clicking that, if there are specific attribution rules you're looking to apply, we'd be happy to dive into exactly the ones that are available on our platform that will meet those goals for you. But it's very, very customizable.
Yeah, and I'd say it becomes more and more important. We opened this poll earlier. I've just surfaced it again. It's still open. So if you haven't voted yet, go ahead and do so. Configurable attribution becomes more and more important the more media partners you have in your digital media mix. Because if you're just running with a couple networks or DSPs, if you will, there's not a ton of overlap. Media mix over attribution isn't too big of a problem. There's some light effort you can put into configurable attribution that'll go a long way. But the more partners you get, as Caitlin mentioned, those settings can be adjusted at the partner level, at a tracker level, and even at an app level as well for certain blanket settings at a specific iOS or Android app or CTV app. And we help guide you on what to set those to, because sometimes it can be like, well, I see I have all these settings, but I don't want to mess with anything unless I know why and what I should do, and we can help you answer those questions. So we're getting close here, and there's still questions we haven't gotten to. We were going to talk through this real fast. I'm just going to voice over this in less than 30 seconds to say that there's a notion of attributed versus associated events within our platform. And it controls the idea of if somebody has converted on an app install, how long after that app install do subsequent events that user takes or completes still get adorned with the attribution of their prior conversion to a paid or owned media moment. And this diagram here showcases what that flow looks like. So this is something you'll see in Kochava Analytics and reporting. We have a blog about it in the Docs tab. And if it's a topic you want to explore, I encourage you to click through on that and explore that. This diagram is in that blog post and it unpacks in a ton of detail. So at this point, I want to end on talking about the future of attribution and quickly have really you, James, talk about, Kochava is one of the only MMPs that has both last touch attribution and multi-touch attribution, while also marketing mix modeling as a capability, which is kind of as we look toward the signalless future where ad signal and stuff is becoming harder to come by. Can you walk us through the difference between MMM and LTA?
Yes. Quickly, last touch attribution, what we've been talking about this entire time is, this is a real-time system. This is kind of the core of what our attribution system does is answering the question of what was the last touch point that was observed with a given user that led to the desired conversion action. this is real time. This is, processing signals we've been talking about in real time to produce an answer and provide those signals back to your media channels such that they can optimize your campaigns. Marketing mix modeling is fundamentally different in that it is fundamentally answering a different question, which is to say, taking into account all sorts of factors, all of your media mix, external factors, things like holidays, things like seasonal events, things like sporting events, the weather. All of these things end up being inputs into a statistical model on MMM, which is giving you feedback on the influence of all factors, especially media channels in relation to one another, but also in relation to all the external things that do not get picked up by a last touch system. And these are not, one is not exclusive of the other. Both are important, but kind of our thesis at Kochava is that the world is moving into a place where MMM is going to be much more prominent, specifically because of Jeff's comment around the deprecation of signal, the lack of availability of certain things that we've seen and that we've talked about throughout the last hour.
Yeah, and I'll close by saying that there's a kind of symbiotic relationship between what you can do with your last touch, multi-touch attribution data and how those signals can feed into MMM to help you optimize from the top down. So we have some links in the docs tab related to that. And you can explore those further as well. And I'll just close here in this last moment. We have kind of this notion of, we've talked about a ton today. We've unpacked a lot. Hopefully this is helpful. And if you watch this on demand, you can pause and go back and rewatch sections because we went through pretty quick. But yeah, so best practices, as I rattle these off, one is just, get an attribution game plan in order and do it before you launch your campaigns. Don't think about this stuff after your campaigns are already live. If they are live and then at that point, yes, it's better to do something now than wait till much later. Event measurement, Caitlin, thanks for covering that in terms of measuring events throughout the entire funnel. Don't just get bottom funnel events that you'll have very few of. You need that full funnel to really do effective optimization. We've talked about configurable attribution. It's powerful, so be sure that you actually use it. Owned media, don't forget to measure it. We didn't talk really much at all about fraud prevention. There is a webinar in the docs tab. That's something that comes usually out of the box at some level with an attribution provider. So ask about details for that. And then again, we talked mostly digital today. If you are running on advanced channels and they're offline or outdoor, or any number of other types of environments, get in touch with us. There are ways to measure those. And in terms of future-proofing your measurement strategy and growth strategy going forward, if you haven't looked at MMM at all yet, put it on your radar, get in touch with us about it. There are some things you could start doing today, even if you're not ready to adopt MMM or look seriously at it, just to get your data hygiene in order, because that is going to be the biggest barrier, if you will, at times, to effectively onboarding an MMM solution is just clean, clear data. So we've gone a little bit over, a minute, I think. But James, Caitlin, Jacob, thank you for unpacking this with us today. Super helpful and hopefully super informative for everyone in the audience. So thank you to everyone for joining us. And if we didn't get to your questions, we'll follow up with you directly. So have a great rest of your day or evening, wherever you may be. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.